welcome to the Legacy Lifestyle Podcast. I'm here with my lovely wife, Jesse. She's going to be guiding us through part 2 of difficult conversations.
So you still think I'm lovely, even though you think I'm underdressed?
Well, I'm just saying you wore that to the gym today. I'm not. See, I just told on you there.
I didn't work out in this.
No, not the Nebraska shirt.
Yeah.
But
fine. They don't even see my second half. I'm like wearing jogger pants.
Your second half?
Like my other half.
There's a first half and a second half?
The bottom half.
This isn't a ball game.
The bottom half and the top half. Anyways.
All right. Well, we're just going to keep things rolling right along here.
Hopefully you're not offended.
Hopefully this doesn't turn into a difficult conversation, but this is part 2 in kind of this series of safe conversations we've been talking about, part 2 of difficult conversations. And last week we kind of covered this whole idea of like the conversation within the conversation. Like, so when you have, when a problem arises and you're facing these challenges, we kind of talked about how there's some things associated with, you got to be able to identify the emotions. What are you feeling? And kind of the conversation that you're already having in your head, that internal dialogue that we all have, assessing and judging and all of that stuff. And we all have that going on. And this takes an immense amount of humility. And so we're not going to recap all of those things. Go back and check that episode. It'll be the one before this one, just to give you some practical steps on how to identify those things. And I think before we jump into this material, because we're talking about that conversation, that internal conversation, nobody's really good at this. At least I don't know anybody who I would say, I'm really good at that. But it's a skill we can grow in.
Right. Absolutely.
And I'd say like in 18 years of marriage, this was something that we definitely didn't come across naturally.
No.
But
our first 2 years was a lot of emotionally charged conversations.
And we are just stubborn enough that, through our clashes and through our fighting, I think we came to a place of starting to identify these things. So these 5 steps that we're going to give today of like really how to have this difficult conversation, you got to start with this place of identifying what's going on. Am I associating identity with any of these things? Because sometimes we'll make the problem about us when make the problem the problem.
Right. Absolutely.
And I love this quote. It comes from a book called Rare Leadership, where they say, keep the relationship bigger than the problem.
Yeah, that's good.
Keep the relationship bigger than the problem. And that's how, no matter what. So whether this is a marriage, whether this is your organization, keep the relationships bigger than the problem.
Yeah.
That's the key to having difficult conversations. So here we go. We're gonna jump into this. So that here's the first step. All right. So this is the actual like conversation or
how to start
the difficult conversation. Again, already identifying some of the internal stuff. Now this is actually when we come to the nuts and bolts of putting these things together. And I like to say that this is really that moment of we need to talk.
Yeah.
We need to talk. And so there's some preparation that can happen. And
step 1 is preparation.
Yeah, step 1 is preparation. So, okay, sort out what happened. And one of the things they say is like quite often we get the intentions of the other side wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
it's that don't make assumptions.
Don't make assumptions, yeah.
Don't take things personally.
And it's real easy for me to identify what you did wrong.
Right.
But it's not as easy for me to identify, well, what did I do wrong? Right. It's interesting. I just came out of a staff meeting, and one of my coworkers said something, was cracking a joke. And I kind of I went and because it kind of just brought up some frustrations of my history. And so I completely missed the joke. And I kind of went to this place of, and it wasn't even directed towards them. It had to do with sound. They were talking about sound and stuff. Of course, my background of mixing sound and being in a band and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that would drive me nuts is when someone, I can't hear this. Well, I can't hear this. I can't hear this. And you just start turning up. And it's so frustrating. If you've ever been a sound man or a sound person, that
probably really understand this.
It gets really frustrating. And so when you're dealing with acoustics and stuff, and this conversation that we were having in the staff meeting was just, how we're dealing with issues of sound. And, he kind of cracked this joke of, why don't we just give megaphones to everybody? And I'm like, the solution is not turning everything up, and it's like, but what I did in that moment was I kind of made it about me, I kind of made it about, my history and stuff. He was cracking a joke. And, I'm serious trying to solve a problem. And I missed the joke, which I don't like missing jokes, but that's just something that happens. It's easy, so even in that, having that difficult conversation, sometimes we can there's nerves that can get touched, and sometimes we got to examine that. And I just, as I sat there and I went to him later, I said, I'm sorry, I completely missed the joke. I'm sorry about that. It wasn't about you. That was more about me. And so just to kind of make amends. And that's kind of what we're talking about. That's the preparation you got to have.
Preparation, of identifying where the other person contributed, where you contributed. And if you are having a really hard time, maybe it's something that's really emotionally charged thing that you're having to discuss. Like, because there's some really hard situations in marriages and families that it's really sometimes difficult to take the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
And so I like that they're like, you need to think of it in that preparation time when you're away from the person that you're going to be discussing the problem with. When you're breaking down everything, you kind of need to think about what a dispassionate observer, how they would see the problem and how they might break it down.
Yeah, because they're not going to be emotionally invested in this like you are. And so let's talk about that for a second, because here is so key. And even in preparation for the conversation, you got to identify, okay, how is this problem making me feel? Right. Or how what was said, how does this make me feel? I know a lot of people, some people shy away from this. Oh, don't talk about emotions. Listen, you're an emotional being. You're an emotional creature.
Absolutely. Everybody has them.
Everybody. And I don't care if you think I'm not emotional, you're emotional. You've probably learned how to stuff them really well, but let's just be honest. It's not healthy. But Jesse, you brought up this. There's a book that we kind of love. It's called How We Love.
Yeah.
And in there, they have this list of soul words. So why don't you talk about just kind of those emotional identifiers, what you were thinking on that?
So sometimes we'll use things like, you upset me when you did this, or you hurt me when you did this. Well, soul words are going a little bit deeper. So like, that made me angry. Okay, well, angry is a kind of a really vague word. And sometimes it just means annoyed, controlled, manipulated.
Yeah.
So like, okay, what about angry? Like, go to a deeper word. And so I don't know if this is just in that book or if it's something where you could Google soul words. But it kind of highlights like happy, loving, high energy, and then it breaks it down into several different words. So that when you're into this next part of the conversation we'll get to here in a minute, you can ask clarifying questions, saying, when you said that you were angry, does that mean you were annoyed by me, or did you feel controlled?
Two different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Two-way different things.
And that helps you really understand that other person and where the other person's coming from, because if they're feeling controlled by you, well, then you have to ask other questions. Well, how did that make you feel controlled? Or that was not my intention. So, and so then it just kind of helps break everything down, I feel like, a little bit deeper. Well,
because the thing of it is, and that's what I love about this soul words chart, is they're kind of general descriptions. If you think about it, happy is general.
Yeah.
Anger is general.
But so if you say, a lot
well, I got really angry, or I felt anger. I felt anger in our conversation. Well, that could mean one thing to me, and that could mean something completely different. What I like about this soul words chart, and I would just encourage you to go out there, Google them. There's I've seen different diagrams of things like this. But like, for example, like you said with angry, there's annoyed, controlled, manipulated, furious, grouchy, grumpy, irritated, provoked. I mean, even provoked. I felt provoked. Well, that gives a little bit more, it hones in and gives a little bit more of a description of where that person is. And so, like you said, it allows for those clarifying questions. Yeah. Let's look at another one here. Let's go happy. Well, there's cheerful, delightful, elated, encouraged. There's a kind of a specific.
Yeah.
Well, I was happy. Well, how were you happy? Well, what you said encouraged me.
Yeah.
Well, that's very specific in that, again, it's a helpful identifier. And
gratified,
absolutely. Like, thankful, right?
It's like, man, that. Or lighthearted. Like you just lightened my day. You made me feel, just you lifted a weight off me. I feel like, lighthearted. It's like kind of helps you, like, I don't know. That's how I view it. Maybe that's the wrong way of viewing lightheartedness. But.
Well, and so anyway, here's the deal is that's step one, is really prepare by walking through what we talked about last week, right? Those other 3 conversations. And so understanding what's going on internally. Now, something that you and I mentioned just before starting to record this episode was this gets really difficult to do in the heat of the moment when things come up. And I don't want to say that you can't do this in the heat of the moment, because I think that as you grow and you understand yourself and you kind of get more in touch with, what's going on internally, I think you can. But I think it's also helpful to recognize, hey, we need to come back and talk about this, or we need to come back, let's take 5 minutes and, maybe kind of go through this in our minds or whatever. So I don't want to say you can't do this in the heat of the moment, but it takes 2 really emotionally mature people to be able to do that if something's coming up in the moment. Absolutely. So step 1 is you kind of prepare. You kind of know what's going on internally. I'm taking that like what you said about the bystander. If there was someone sitting there watching in on the situation or the event, what might they have seen? What might be their perspective? So step 2 then is check your purposes and decide whether to raise it. Now, what basically your purposes is like, what solution am I really working towards?
Right. What's your purpose in the conversation?
Yeah. What's the purpose of the conversation? Here's what it cannot be. I just need to get this off my chest and tell you you're wrong.
Right.
which is how most difficult conversations go, if we're honest. I just really need to get this off my chest. You stink, Well,
and it's like, or I need you to know that I'm right. It's like,
absolutely.
I just really need you to understand that I'm right.
So, thinking about it, if you use the language of purpose, does the purpose make sense?
Right.
No, like, okay, here is the problem. And I don't think we were seeing the problem the same way. So if you can begin to articulate that, you're knowing that you're able to have this conversation. Again, separate, but that requires kind of separating the emotion out of like, what is the problem really?
You really have to be very introspective.
Yep.
And be willing to be honest with yourself, which is sometimes one of the harder people to be honest with, because most of the time we like to live in denial when it comes to our own emotions and how we deal with life.
Well, we have to admit we might be wrong about something.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The second is just like the real issue inside you.
Yeah.
So identifying if you're having an emotional response, maybe why you're having that, or if there's like a past situation that has driven your emotion to that point.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's just a past and it's kind of like shaped your identity and how you view maybe how the person communicated with you. Like early on in our marriage,
oh boy,
he would talk in like a stern voice, and I'd be like, stop yelling at me. So my brother would say that my dad absolutely yelled in our home. For me personally, my dad literally would just be like, Jesse, done? And I would like kind of just come to like realizing that, man, I'm in trouble just by tone. And so I never really remember my dad yelling at me, but I do remember strong tone. And so I often just tell you, stop yelling at you. Like, I'm not yelling at you.
Yeah.
So just identifying those little triggers, again, just how you approach a conversation, how maybe your past has an effect on your current ability to walk through those things.
Yeah. And so even within that, then, thinking, is there a better way to address the issue? In something that's really important is a lot of times, let's just say you're in a staff meeting and there's some solutions to a problem you're discussing as a staff, and someone says, hey, I think scenario A, and you propose scenario B, someone else says scenario C, and let's say they go with scenario A, and you're sitting there feeling dejected. And so you kind of make a stink about it and stuff. But the thing of it is, sometimes if you process and you're like, I need to talk about this. Well, what was it? Was it about the idea, or was it about that you faced rejection in that moment?
Right.
Because if it's just about you facing rejection, that's something you need to deal with. This doesn't need to be brought up, because at the end of the day, can you detach and say, well, it may not have been the solution I wanted to go with as a team, but that's not a value statement about me.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it's important that we sometimes, because again, we make things very personal.
Yeah. Which I like this. It says, it's not my responsibility to make things better.
Yeah.
It's my responsibility to do my best.
Yeah.
So it's just putting your best foot forward, really, in this situation.
And they call in the book, difficult conversations, they call these liberating assumptions. Liberating assumptions. That it's not my responsibility to make things better. It's my responsibility to do my best. The two more is that they have limitations too. Right? Yeah. And then the third thing is this conflict is not who I am. It's amazing how much of this comes back to identity. We tend to associate our performance, our environment with us.
Right.
And so everything, if it's good, we feel great. If it's bad,
Which I think is a product of just growing up in America, because when you're asked, it's like, oh, how are you doing? It's usually like, oh, well, work was good today. Or, we divert to like our tasks. We don't really address.
We're very performance oriented.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, granted, we kind of were raised that way. It's like you need to do, work hard and, all that stuff. So there is a little bit of that.
It is. And it's kind of the American, definitely the American way. And I think about even just, for you and I growing up, you in Kansas, me in Nebraska, I've wondered how much of the pioneering spirit has left with it. And I think there's the pioneering spirit for the last 200 years that shaped America.
Absolutely.
But we are very defined by what we bring to the table, what we can produce. Even the fact that we're in an agricultural society where we're at, it's easy to see that you plant seeds, you get a great harvest, So everything kind of comes back to this, I am what I can generate. And so if you're in these environments where things aren't looking as good, it's easy to have that identity, built around those things. So absolutely. I love this one. Step 3 then is start from the third story. Okay. And we mean like story is in like higher perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I love this in a leadership book that I came across.
Third person, like when you're reading a story from a book.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're talking from a third person perspective, where it's like outside of the situation, they're not directly involved.
What I loved, and I think this is an amazing leadership nugget, is I came across this in a leadership book where they said, as a leader, you need to get on the balcony. And what was said was like, if your organization is like a dance floor and everybody's out there, woo, having a good time, you as the leader, you're kind of in the center of that action, right? And again, this applies. I know I keep saying this. I'm like a broken record. I'm not just talking about organizations here. I'm talking about in your families and what you can get caught up in the day to day, in the frantic pace. If you're that entrepreneur that's just that kind of go getter and making things happen, and so you can be out on the dance floor and you can have other people joining you, but it's helpful to get away from that, go up to the balcony, and take a look at the dance floor. And here's what you're going to see. You're going to find, hey, maybe some things, people are moving and shaking in the middle of this thing, but wait a minute. Why is that person standing off to the side?
Yeah.
Why does that person look like they're leaving the dance? Why is that? Because when you get on the balcony, it starts to open up your perspective. Because when you're on the dance floor, in the middle dance floor, all you see is people dancing.
Yes, absolutely.
But when you remove yourself and put yourself on the balcony, you start to put yourself in those people's shoes of why are the people on the fringes? Why are that? So as you're leading an organization, it's really easy to get caught up in profits and losses and all the technical stuff. And we're doing this. We got this new project. We got this new thing. Or maybe in a marriage. Oh, well, we're building a new house, or we're, these different things. And it's easy to get caught up in the motion of that. But are you stepping back and taking a survey of the landscape?
Yeah.
Are you getting that perspective? And I think that idea coming to a difficult conversation, it once again, it's going out and saying, okay, I'm trying to, as best I can, remove myself from the situation, go up to the balcony or to the third story and just look down and get that perspective. It's really hard to do because it's not natural.
Right.
It's not natural.
We always want to identify our own part of it.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, though, if we can do this, the more we can kind of, remove ourselves from the dance floor and ask that question. And again, in organizational leadership, why aren't those people dancing? Why, in a difficult conversation, why is this person not contributing to the problem the way I think they should? Or why, well, maybe it's because you haven't understood their part of the story.
Right. Well, and I like that this says, from a third person or third party perspective, it's like there's no judgment about who's right or wrong.
Right.
You're really not invested in this person's right, this person's wrong. You're more trying to understand the different perspectives of each person and, okay, how are you seeing the problem and how is this other person seeing the problem? And then trying to find like key identifiers, maybe why a problem arose in the first place. Because sometimes I felt like in our own marriage, there's been moments where we've had conversations and there's been a solution before we even had to have the difficult conversation, because we were able to kind of view it from that outside perspective and realize, okay, this is how he's presented it. This is how I'm thinking of it. But if I were an outsider, like, how would I really be looking at this? And then really being able to just kind of bring it to a close. Like it then isn't even a problem at that point, because you realize, oh, we're just not communicating the same thing. And we think we are, but we're not.
And this kind of gets back to our very first episode when we talk about, every there's cultures, macro and micro. What I love about the dance floor analogy again is maybe as an organization, you really like loud music.
Right.
And so maybe someone's leaving the party because they don't like loud music. Well, at that point, that's where you get to kind of make a call of, well, can I turn the music down? Is that okay? Does that fit who we are? If not, then you just have to be okay with loud music. It isn't everybody's thing.
Right.
And so again, that's not personal.
Yes, absolutely.
You can't take those things personal. If this is who we are, if this is the culture, again, not as long as people aren't getting hurt or there's not, negligence or abuse or anything like that. But as organizations, we can tend to do things or move at a certain pace. That's not everybody's pace.
Yeah.
Now, obviously within a family dynamic, you are a family, and so you got to pay attention that if there's things culturally that your kids aren't really connecting with, well, now that turns into more of a parenting issue of, I need to make sure, because we are a team, and so if I need to care about, kind of the least of these in my organization as a family, I need to care about them. And so, I want to make sure my kids are included on things if we're moving as a family, but even as a parent, we need to get to that third story.
Well, and what I'm kind of understanding about like these, like the first 3 steps in this like difficult conversation, most of these are done prior to you sitting down with the other person. And then like step 4 and 5 that we're going to approach here in just a second are more, okay, so step 3, you kind of end the conversation by inviting that other person, hey, can we have a difficult conversation, or can we have a conversation about the iPhone, that's been one of ours that we've had to have. And so then that invites that other person to participate. And so,
can we do that? And framing it as a question.
So
again, getting that third story perspective, that dance, get into the balcony. So then step 4 then is explore their story in yours. Now this involves listening.
Yes, which is not ping-ponging.
No.
So this is not just waiting for Kris to be quiet, and then Jesse can talk.
Tell me what you think, and I'll tell you where you're wrong.
Right.
Yeah, it can't be that. No, it's really empathizing. It's really getting in their shoes.
And this is where that soul words would be really helpful, because then that's why we brought it up early on, is because you kind of do need to start identifying what about the conversation made you feel, and how did it specifically make you feel, so that you can clarify. And this is where that empathetic listening, where you need to try to put yourself in their shoes, even if you don't understand why they're feeling the way that they're feeling.
So for example, if we're having a difficult conversation and I say, okay, Jesse, I understand that when I said what I did, that you were angry, but you've now unpacked that for me a little bit and you were actually annoyed. So I understand. Tell me if I'm wrong. When I tell dad jokes, you get annoyed.
Correct.
Yeah. See, that's how you do it. It's you want to be able to here's the key to that, is really framing it in their language. Because here's what happens when you do that. When you say, hey, am I understanding this right? It's an open invitation.
Right. It's not a cross-examination.
It's not a cross-examination. It's an open invitation to say, hey, do I have this right? When I do X, Y, and Z, that made you feel annoyed.
Yeah.
And it's not even me saying, well, you're right, and I just won't do that anymore.
No.
But it's at least it's building this road of understanding between the two of us that you actually feel at least somewhat validated in, okay, you get it.
Yeah. You now understand me.
Yep. You now understand me.
So we can continue the conversation. It's like, what impact have my actions had on you?
Yeah. That's a tough question.
That's a tough question to ask. But if we never ask that question, we'll never really understand. So like, when you would leave your socks on the ground,
oh boy,
at our house, your actions made me, not made me feel, but they impacted me because I didn't think that I was being valued for my hard work. And so
yeah,
it's like I had this value attached to cleaning the house and doing all that stuff. But also I needed you to understand that your actions had an impact on how that made me feel day in and day out.
And now, you're talking about the socks again. Bring that up all the time, Brent.
Because we've solved it. It's not.
I'm not just confused. I'm mystified.
I didn't want to bring up something we're currently dealing with.
I am mystified that you would bring. See, I'm searching soul words here. No, I'm kidding. No, I think here's some good example questions. Things like, can you say a little bit more about how you see things, or how about this? What information do you have that I don't? Yeah. Or where do you think I'm not seeing this clearly? Again, questions are invitations.
Yes.
And so questions are invitations. We want to give invitation, because if you're not extending invitations, it will turn into ping ponging. Well, you, we're just knocking the ball back and forth, and we're really not getting anywhere. But questions are, questions are those invitations. So, anything else on that you want to?
Just really acknowledging feelings, because I think sometimes just in our world we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I don't know if feelings are seen as bad, but this is not agreeing with the person that what they feel is validated. Like, because sometimes feelings aren't always true.
Yeah. Well,
feelings are there. They're present.
They're real.
Right. But they're not always truth telling.
And they're not always grounded in reality.
That's what I meant by validate.
Yeah, they're not always grounded in reality, because I could give an eye roll and you could say, well, I feel stupid now because you rolled your eyes. It's like, well, no, I wasn't rolling my eye. Sometimes there's clarity that needs to come. We can take things personally, and or a tone of voice or something like that, which may or may not be truthful.
Exactly.
And we got to be careful about, because a lot of communication is nonverbal. But like what you're saying is, I might feel a certain way. Well, maybe I don't have all the facts.
Right.
Hey, you rejected my plan. I threw this plan out there.
That's why I don't like your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth.
That's a whole nother podcast. But no, like go back to that scenario. Like if, solution A, solution B, solution C. Well, maybe if I say, well, you need to, I propose my solution, and someone in the room is, who looks at the bottom line says, we don't have the money for that. Well, that might not be information that I'm privy to. And so I just automatically take it as they never accept my ideas.
Yeah.
Well, no, we just don't have the budget for your idea. It's not that it was a bad idea, but so I could have a feeling of rejection, but that feeling might not be rooted in reality.
Yeah,
I feel it.
Exactly.
I feel it, but it could be me making an assumption or taking something personally, which that could be a whole nother podcast, the 4 agreements there. So we get to step 5, and we'll wrap this up here. This is where we get to the problem solving. And so the thing of it is like, if you've as much as you've emotionally you've understood your emotions, but you've separated from them, offered that perspective, that's where you can kind of go back and forth. Well, would it work if, and again, asking that question of like, well, so you feel like you're not heard in this situation. Yeah. So back to the texting and cell phone. How about you want to talk to me? I'm going to put my cell phone, over here as we talk. Would that work? Would that make you feel more heard? And you get the invitation to speak into that as to whether it would work or not.
Yeah.
I love something that like Dave Ramsey talks about when he talks about, if you've ever been through like Financial Peace University, because money obviously is a big conflict in marriages. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he talks about is, he says, usually in every home there's a free spirit and there's a nerd. And And the free spirit doesn't want to live by a budget. The nerd wants to control everything through a budget. And it's amazing how these two people find themselves. But even through that, I mean, you talk about having a difficult conversation. Even in that, he will say, hey, let the nerd come up with the budget. But the nerd has to sit down with the free spirit, and they still got to come to an agreement. They still have to come to
the other person gets to say, okay, but you don't have vacation budgeted in, or you don't have a date night budgeted in, because those are fun things sometimes. And so sometimes the nerd won't think of those things because it's not on the top of their radar. Yeah. They're thinking more, we have to pay medical bills, we have to take care of the cars, we have to take care of all of the household things. And so they're not necessarily thinking of the fun parts of life.
Right.
And that's where the free spirit can come in and kind of like say, okay, but where are we going to do this? And where are we going to do this? Because we do eat out, and we do have parties and different things for birthdays and stuff like that.
And the nerd gets to say, okay, where would you like to take that from? Because if you follow that guide of Dave Ramsey's, he's basically said, hey, if the nerd has accounted for every dollar, then the free spirit gets to look at it and say, well, maybe we don't need this much for clothing, or maybe we don't need quite this much for, whatever.
Right.
And so
reallocate those funds.
They get to kind of put in some input, and that's where they get some ownership of the budget. Yes. So it's not just about one person saying, I've accounted for every dollar, this is what it is. Yeah. No, both get to have a say. Right. But that's also playing to each other's strengths as well.
Absolutely. And with cell phones, I'd say, we have to be willing to understand if that other person is waiting on something from work. Right. And it's kind of important. It's important for that other person to communicate, hey, I am waiting for something from work, and I will have to interrupt whatever's going on to answer back. Right. So that it gives that other person the understanding of, okay, they're not trying to ignore me. Their text messages aren't more important than me, which again, those are assumptions that you're making about what that other person really thinks. Most of the time it's not that. Usually it's just reactive. Yeah. And so, and then if you can think of times, like for us, like we just have our Monday, Tuesday evening meals with our kids where we just don't allow devices at our table. Yeah. Because we want those to be intentional conversations with our family. So if Kris is waiting on something from work, that he needs to get clarification for the next day or the next 2 days, he usually communicates, hey, I have to have my phone because somebody might be texting me. So that makes us all aware that the only reason Dad has his phone at the table is because he needs to get address something if something comes up. And then I really like how this says, don't exaggerate. Don't use phrases like always and never, which was a huge thing for me.
Jesse always does it, and I never do. Oh, well, sorry.
I mean, first years of marriage, that might be accurate. Because and so just recognizing that, those words are final. Yeah. And they make that other person always wrong. Yep. So it's that's why you can't use those phrases, because even if something's consistent in another person, it's not always happening. And if you use those terms, usually you're not recognizing where the other person is changing.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
And where they're adapting to try to be better, because you have presented a situation and they've realized their part in it. And peripherally you have accepted your part in it. Yeah. And so then you can kind of come to this solution of like, okay, he is trying, or whatever that situation may be. But
so here's the thing. I think, we'll just land it here. Step 5 in the problem solving, working towards solutions. I think one of the things that maybe is often overlooked is just keeping the lines of communication open. Absolutely. Being able to come back and evaluate, being able to keep things open to say, you need little touch points of, hey, we had this conversation. How's this going? Yeah. how's this working out? Is this, and whatever the problem is, do you feel like we've addressed this? Do you feel like, because I think so often we can have these heat of the moment conversations, feel like we clear the air, and it's awkward. Sometimes it's tough to come back and just say, hey, is this working out? But here's the good news. If you've got to this problem solving stage where you've proposed some solutions, and it's okay to take ownership in those moments to say, hey, I know I said I would do this, and I've recognized that, man, I'm just not as consistent there. There's just got to be some humility and some grace. At least if that person's taking some ownership of that, like, hey, I know I said this and I told you I would do X, Y, and Z, and man, I've kind of fallen through on Z. At least you acknowledging it, though, that's building trust.
Right, absolutely. Well, and the expectation reality.
Yeah.
Where you have that.
Yep, the gap. Disappointment is the gap between expectation and reality.
It's like, it also, like, sometimes you don't realize all the things that will come up.
Yeah.
And so it's that touch point conversation where it kind of helps, hey, I didn't realize that this and this and this would be on my plate this week.
Yep.
And so this is why I wasn't able to get to that. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to, but, the expectation was this, but my reality hit
was something different.
And so
absolutely
being able to do that.
Well, that's part two. That's part two of difficult conversations. So nice job, Jesse.
Yes.
High
now
five.
you all can go have your
Go right now. Go do it. Yeah. But hopefully you feel like you got some tools. Probably want to listen to this podcast, the other one on repeat, because again, it's not natural. It's not something that comes natural to us. And this is stuff that's like in the leadership world. I mean, business leaders, Harvard Business Review, people like that, they're finding out that, man, we can be better at this, but it is difficult. It's really hard to do. So thanks for tuning in. If you've not already liked, subscribed, rated our podcast, we'd love it if you do so. And keep it locked in here, and we'll keep going with how you can live a legacy lifestyle.